Kathy Brown is Chief Executive Officer and President of the Internet Society. And the Internet Society is, I'm sure most of you know, is a really powerful voice for the internet community and is an internationally respected expert on technical development and policy issues. Kathy joined the Internet Society as President and Chief Executive Officer 18 months ago. She's a veteran of internet policy development and initiatives that have helped the internet's global expansion. In her leadership role in the Internet Society, Kathy's mission is to keep the internet open and thriving and benefiting all people throughout the world. Before joining the Society, Kathy led policy and global corporate social responsibility initiatives for Verizon, and earlier in her career served in President Bill Clinton's administration. A fantastic expert who is going to speak with us and also take questions from us. Would you please give a huge warm welcome to Kathy Brown.
So I always thought I spoke too fast, having been brought up in New York, but you beat all of us out, Michelle. So good morning, everyone, and thank you ever so much for asking us to be here and for the great, wonderful hospitality that we have been shown during the last 3 days when we used this very room for our get-together, which I'll talk about in just a minute. I want to say how much I enjoy being with a group of people who actually understand and have completely internalized the idea of collaboration and equality in the room. It's pretty inspiring. I was quite inspired as well by the welcoming this morning, and was reflecting on how the values of NetHui and the values of the Internet Society seem so aligned. But I was also thinking about how they seem to have come from, perhaps from different spirits within us, and yet we end up in the same place on the internet. So for instance, I felt that sense of community that clearly is part of this country and part of the land and part of the people here, and it felt very spiritual to me. Having just lost my dad myself when we talked about people going to the stars, see, it still just breaks me up. It's beautiful. But that has brought about this sense of community and this embrace of the internet. So it's all kind of interesting, right? The internet is a technological advancement of the human mind and the human capacity, but somehow it has these same properties, right? Of this community building, this sharing, this openness that we like to talk about. And I note when I look at the values that NetHui sets out, that they're very much our values. And in the Internet Society, openness, community, our ability to share, talk with each other, collaborate, all in the sense of this very goodwill notion that human beings have a need to connect, have a need to share and collaborate. So it feels very, very good to be here. And if you wouldn't mind a little personal story, I was realizing as I came into Auckland that the last time I was here, the only other time I was here, was also the 4th of July, because at the time, I was in the Clinton administration, actually at the Department of Commerce, Jordan at NTIA, believe it or not. And we were coming to New Zealand. Do you know why? Because New Zealand was one of the most early adopters of the internet. And at the time, we were talking to the entire world about the wonders of the internet. And it had to be 1998. And I was thinking, now, why was I here in 1998? And so the internet's wonderful, isn't it? So 1998 was when the announcement of the Southern Cross cable from LA to Auckland. So here I was at the beginning of laying the new capacity to New Zealand to connect with the United States and really hailing New Zealand as a front runner on the internet. I think it was 1989 or so when the university became online, and so you were showing us the way. How's that? Very cool, huh? And then here I am, almost 20 years later, whatever that is, 13 years later, in this place, in this room with the Internet Society. Funny how life goes. And in this very room last night, we brought in the world. So our community was a gathering of the world, our global partners here in New Zealand. And when I told folks we were going to do this, they said, how the heck can you go to the farthest ends of the earth and think you are going to connect the rest of the world? And we said, well, watch us. But here's the deal. You had the capacity to do it. You had the capacity here in Auckland and here in this conference hall for us to talk last night to groups the size of this in Accra, Amsterdam, Bangalore, Geneva, Istanbul, Hong Kong, Manila, Montevideo, Nairobi, New York, Ottawa, San Salvador, Tunis, Washington. Oh, and Santo Domingo. So we did this in 2 separate sessions. Up on that screen, we saw every one of those rooms, and we were able to have a dialogue on the very issues that you are going to talk about today. I find this really amazingly exciting. You have the local feel and the local processes and the local values that bring you together to have this kind of open discussion about the issues of the internet, the challenges now in the 21st century, very different from what they were in 1998. And we came here to bring the world on the global stage to do the same. Pretty neat. So thank you very much again for having us, for including us. We certainly feel part of you, and I hope we will continue that tradition. So, okay, the internet is everybody's business. I kind of like that idea. But I was thinking about it this morning, thinking, well, what would I say about business the internet being everybody's business? I had 3 thoughts. The business of business, our personal business, and none of your business. So I thought maybe I would just talk a little bit about those 3 ideas. So it turns out, as you well know, that having the kind of internet penetration that New Zealand has results in the kind of economic development that you just heard Amy talking about. And we know that's true. We know that's true across the world. We've seen it everywhere, that the internet has reached a tipping point, as I said 2 weeks ago in Tunis. It's happening now in Africa, and we're going to see the same thing happening there. Here in New Zealand, there is a real developed market. There's developed deployment. And you see that growth that has transpired in the economy. Now, that doesn't mean that economies aren't also susceptible to all the other things that are happened in the world, but we know that the GDP of a nation is highly correlated with the penetration of internet. That's pretty powerful, and it's also pretty enlightening about what has to happen around the world in all of our places in order to see that kind of growth. It turns out also that 75% of that benefit goes to traditional businesses. So it's not just that the internet itself and those who provide it are seeing their own self grow, but that all businesses around and all enterprises, if you will, see that benefit goes to 75% of those. And you know this as well. You have seen the transformative power of the internet on economies as your own. And you know what happens, because I've met a number of you in the room, when you don't have that access. You know that you don't see the kind of growth that you would want if you don't have that access. So the business of business in the 21st century is all about a digital world, right? About the ability to connect globally. And in a place like New Zealand, you feel that even more than most places, because you know that your business is over the sea. It's over those cables many times. It's through that satellite, not so much anymore. Now, if you're sitting in an island out in the Pacific, you're looking over here saying, so what about me? And what is then the strategy for ensuring that that kind of growth arrives in all places? And we'll get back to that in a minute. So what about our personal business? So when we think about how life has changed for us, for our children, for the generation that's to follow, since those early years that we became connected, we know that it's been phenomenally impactful. So you took the poll this morning that Jordan did, you know, do you bank online? Most people start to bank online. Do you pay your bills online? Do you take classes online? Do you talk to your doctor online? More and more that's happening. I don't know about here, but certainly in my world. Where do you get your entertainment? How do you know what your nieces and nephews are doing in the world? You like them or you friend them on Facebook. I know more about my nieces and nephews than I'm sure my parents ever knew about the siblings of their brothers and sisters. I'm the one who gives the news all the time. I even give the news to my kids about their friends. Did you know so-and-so's now's got a new boyfriend? This is so cool among parents, you know, if you get the news before they do. So really, it's changed not only how we go through our day and our lives, but it also changes, therefore, relationships, right? It's allowed us to be so much more connected, so much more in touch with each other, and it allows us to know things that we ordinarily wouldn't know. And it's a very interesting social phenomena that's happened locally in our own homes, and then, of course, nationally and internationally. So before anyone can even think in a crisis, the news goes across the internet and everyone knows it before the decision maker can have even a second to think about what to do about it, and then we all crowd and say, do it my way. Imagine then having to govern in that situation. Yes, good, and no, sometimes not so good, right? So this transparency that I heard you talking about earlier is something we now demand. And it's almost, if you think about it, because of the way our media now works, but because of the way the internet works. It is all about openness and transparency. That is a value we now hold. And when we are not allowed to see or understand, or for someone to be accountable, we call them to do that. I think that is part of the socioeconomic effects of this thing called the internet. So our personal business is very much in a digital world, affected, impacted, and sometimes shaped by the fact that we are in an online space. Now, what I want to talk about a little bit under this category is interesting to me. I heard Amy talk about fiber, fabulous that you have fiber going to all kinds of places. But you also have, at least until the LTE networks were put in, and I don't know where you are on that here, but you've also had the fastest mobile speeds in the world for the longest time as well. So you have multiple ways of getting online, don't you? So you are now going to, here in New Zealand, be able to access the internet from your homes on very fast fiber. And most of us are walking around with a computer in our pockets, either some kind of device that allows us to get online from anywhere we are. This week we just issued, and you can maybe put this up for me, our global internet report. And our focus this year was on the evolution and development of the mobile internet. Now, this is another change in what and how we think and thought about the internet. I suspect right now you're thinking, well, not really, I use it every day. When did you start doing that? Think about it. The iPhone is only, what, 8 years old? So prior to that moment, you were not on the internet on your telephone, but you are now. In this country, it's huge penetration of internet availability on your mobile device. The numbers globally are fairly startling. 98% of the world, I think is the number, 94% of the global population is covered by mobile networks. And mobile broadband service already covers 48% of the population. From its start just 6 and 7 years ago, more than 28% of the population worldwide has already subscribed. Now think about the difference in behavior now to be on the internet than it was just 8 years ago. You were either in the office or you were home, period, end of story. Now you're everywhere, and you can access that information anywhere you go. So here in New Zealand, you are, if you will, internet rich. Now, I look across the ocean, and we know that there are some of the islands that do have undersea cable, right? Fabulous, I think, happening there. And there are many that do not. But worse than that, can you just do the next slide? Worse than that, they don't even have 3G coverage. I don't think you're seeing the whole slide. There's no 3G coverage, so no ability even to get mobile coverage. All right, there you go. You see that line on the bottom? You know who that is? That is this part of the world that is not developed. The line on the top, that's you guys. So even in the mobile space, we're seeing this huge, huge gap between those who have a lot of connectivity and those who have none. So I only point this out, not because we're going to go down that road right now. That's a lot of talk, I suppose, later. But because we should keep this in mind, that there are parts of the world that have neither yet. The Internet Society is very, very dedicated to making sure that those parts of the world do get access for all the reasons I just spoke about. Because the benefits that flow from that access are profound, both for the economy and both for your personal economy, and it turns out for our whole socialization. As I go across the world, it's kind of interesting what the common language is. It's right here in your hand. You're talking with people and communicating through networks and social networks, et cetera, that sort of make us able to communicate in a way we all understand. Now, I'll get to the next point about none of your business in a minute. But we do understand each other through certain platforms, through certain modalities, and languages, if you will, in ways that didn't happen before. I have a cousin who's deaf. She and I grew up together, and we did all of those things that cousins do, and we were always frustrated with each other because we didn't communicate very well. And along comes the internet, and my relationship with my deaf cousin is completely transformed. We're now best of friends, right? We can communicate all the time. She's still an advocate for her language, a strong advocate, but she's bridged that divide, as have I, off the TTY and onto the internet. Fundamental switches of behavior. And we see this across the world. So let's get to this other issue. Oh, by the way, I just want to show you a little bit more about this report. So it's all online, and it is all interactional. It is mobile, and you can do it on your PC as well. This is an internet map, and you see the pull down on it. You can go to any one of these things, click on that issue. The map will come up for you with numbers behind all of those colors. You run your mouse across, or your finger, as I do on my iPad, and up pops the data. It's a fabulous piece. All of the mobile data, much of the mobile data, it's really a compilation of other people's data. I'm not pretending that we went out and got it ourselves, but it is put in a place and it is organized for you in ways that it's very, very helpful. The second part of the book, and this is what I want to talk about next, talks about some of the challenges, specifically with respect to the mobile platform, to the mobile internet platform, but has some relevance, I think, to the internet overall. So anything that's good, I always say, when pushed to its opposite, can cause us some issues. So the fact that it is an open platform, the fact that everyone can get on, the fact that once access is available, it's easy and permissionless, means that our information is out there. We are exposed unless we choose not to be. And the information is gettable by people and places and entities that we don't want to have our information. So it's none of your business, I think, is an appropriate thing to also consider. Now, it turns out this idea of privacy and what's mine and what's yours is A, cultural, and B, generational. And you know this, right? So my daughter, who's just about to become a lawyer, I said to her, do you understand when you say yes to Instagram, you're giving them a license to everything you have put up on that site, including all of your creative work? Yeah. I said, you get this? You're a lawyer. Do you understand what that means? You don't get it anymore. They get to use it. Yeah, it's okay, fine with me. So I said, why is that? Because the minute I saw that, I said, I'm not doing this. Very generational. The cost of sharing is bearable because the sharing is what is valuable. And to the extent that a young person or someone who thinks that way decides something is valuable, they won't post it. That's the answer I get. If I don't want it to be used, I won't post it, Mom. What's your problem? Now, for me, I'm like, oh, no thank you. I don't know. Maybe I do want that thing someday. Very generational. A lot of good studies on this, by the way. It turns out that at least in those countries where there is plentiful access and these kinds of applications, that you see this generational divide around what is privacy. It turns out that for young people, and for that I mean, I guess under 30, I don't know what young is anymore now that I'm not that anymore. Shame still, however, is what stops people from doing certain things, whether it's in the public square or online. So there is a limit to this. No one wants to be shamed. But they might want to share, and their idea of sharing may be different from someone else's. Now, it's also cultural, as we know, and there are cultures, and there are societies, and there are communities who are more private than others. So the privacy issue, in my mind, gets it's a very local issue, and it's one of the things I like to talk to government officials about. Some idea that we can have one notion of privacy across the world, as the governments keep trying to do, and I think wrong-headed ways through treaties and other ways, is never going to work. Because the notion of privacy is both personal and community. And so, as a community like this, and so because the internet is indeed distributed around the world and is in the hands of many different peoples and cultures, those issues remain really with the community itself. It's something when we think about governance, I like to keep in mind. What are those issues that arise on the internet that really need to remain with the community, the closest to them? My own belief is privacy is one of them. The other issue closely related is security. So, yes, I do my banking online. Is it secure? Yes, I file my taxes online. Is it secure? Yes, I have my medical information online. Is it secure? And that, I think, is the crisis, at least, of the day, in my view, on the internet. I think that we see this concern across users, across governments, across communities about this security notion. And it gets all jumbled up, security, because on the one hand, there are governments in the world who think every security issue is about national security. Some are, some aren't. There are criminals who are quite happy to exploit the holes they find in the internet. And it becomes a law enforcement issue with all kinds of other things attached. Does that mean you can look at everything I do to catch the one bad guy? And it it's really become part of a corporate issue back to business as to whether the data they're using is being used in a way that you have said yes to. Number one, privacy. But number two, that's secure, even if you did say yes to it. You never did intend it to be hacked. You really didn't intend your government ID number to be in the hands of somebody who's going to forge documents with it. So in my view, one of the largest governmental issues, governing issues, social issues, technical issues, is this issue about security. Now, we talked yesterday a lot about our idea of collaborative security. That is that no one law, no one thing you do, not one technical thing, not one policy thing you do is going to really get to this whole problem. That it is because the internet is distributed, because it is a network of networks, because it has devices at the edge. These issues are issues that are all along the chain, both human and technical, and thus we have to solve this problem collaboratively. And we're going to talk a lot about that at the Internet Society because we think that the opposite is very bad for the internet. So if governments decide that they have the answer, even, I believe, in any particular nation state, but certainly if they think there's a global answer to this, we're not going to get to the right place. And the very things that make the internet, its openness, its connectedness, its global reach, are in jeopardy. So it's not your business issue. It's something I think and hope that you spend time with while you're here in community talking. How do we start to think about it? How do we want our government officials to think about it? How do we want to think about this globally? Who gets to say? Who gets to decide? And what can we do about this personally? So from a personal perspective, back to our personal business, we talk a lot about protecting your devices, making sure that you have your firewalls and you've looked to make sure that you've gotten rid of your bugs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we talk about this idea of encryption. Now, next big issue out there, right? If I say I want to protect my data and I'm going to encrypt it end to end, and others say, yeah, but I think I want it. I want your location. I want your marketing data. I want to be able to surveil you if I have to because you might be a criminal. We're in a tug of war here between the personal liberties of users and the common interests of citizens, right? And we have to really have that conversation. Where do we come down? We come down that you get to encrypt your own stuff, and you get to protect it. So have that conversation as well. All right, no, I'm going to hear that monkey pretty soon. So I'm going to wrap up. Hey, you know, I learn fast. I'm going to wrap up by saying this one more time to you. It's extraordinary. This is an extraordinary place. It really is. It's wonderful people, a wonderful spirit, I think. Fabulous technology. I don't think we've done this well with our connections in half the hotels in the world, by the way, and great food. So with that, I will stop talking. I'm happy to take some questions if you like.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Well, huge round of applause for Kathy. And we will take some questions. Can I just impress upon you that they should be questions rather than comments or discussion, because we've got lots of time for discussion, but we've only got Kathy on stage with us right now. So just imagine that this is an opportunity to look inside Kathy's brain and pull out the knowledge that you want from it. So those are the questions that we want to hear. Is that all right with you, Kathy, that description? Good. So what questions do you have? Have I scared you now by asking you to look inside Kathy's brain? Yes, there's a question.
Kia ora, Kathy. Welcome to New Zealand.
Thank you.
I would like to hear your perspective on data sovereignty for Indigenous peoples.
I don't know how much I know about data sovereignty for Indigenous peoples. I think you can teach me. No, so you don't want her to make statements, but I could use a little learning.
Sure, I think that's a really hard question to ask somebody who's just arrived, in a sense, don't you feel? Here's a question right here.
So we'll talk in the hallway, okay, and you can teach me. Okay.
Are you familiar with NetHui's system of universal free Wi-Fi for all people that live on the island?
I don't know your very specific things, but I'm happy to hear about it. And
okay, well, NetHui's actually another country, but associated with us, sort of. But I was just wondering, have you actually looked into, I mean, if we go to universal free Wi-Fi everywhere, and it became sort of something you just expected to always have on everywhere you went, how would you see that changing our usage of the internet?
Changing the use of?
The internet, the communication of everything.
Oh, I think you're seeing it already in many places. Because of the high cost of connection, frankly, on the mobile internet, you see Wi-Fi, as I travel the world, being offered in hotels, in cafes, and you see people online all the time. I think it's even more of a what's coming, frankly, and the ability to be always connected is going to be with us, you know, to look up anything, anywhere, anytime.
The question over here, is it Joy? Or no, next to Joy, is along.
Thanks, Kathy. Joy Liddycote from Office of the Privacy Commissioner. I was really pleased that you touched on the issue of privacy and this balancing. And I suppose it's a question I have in terms of these different definitions of privacy and thinking about all the different chapters within ISOC. And wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about how ISOC's developed this position around balancing privacy, and in particular, a follow-up question from my colleague here on how you determine that encryption should be a positive right for internet users.
Right. So I think we've worked hard on the privacy issue, and you're totally right that our various chapters come at this, as I said, culturally different. We have different notions around the world of what I need to keep private. We also have different notions around the world of what the government ought to be able to see and not see. So I think our position on privacy has been carefully thought through, and we err on the side of a personal choice, so that the tools should be available if you wish to use them to ensure your personal privacy. Do we think you need legislation all over the world to get that? Well, you know, you have to deal with where you are as well. There are some jurisdictions that go that way in terms of setting norms. They do it through laws and legislation. Some have no constitutions, some do, some have no law at all. And so the cool thing about ISOC is that we're able to think about the principles we want to uphold and be in those situations and drive them as far as we can. And it's always through a collaborative process, so that no one entity should be making that decision. Now, with respect to encryption, that really arises from our technical side. This notion that, that when you go in, when those who want to get your data somehow go in and manipulate the network, that you're breaking the network, that you are attacking the network. And that one of the ways that users can ensure that their transmission of data or their storing of data can be kept safe is by, again, asserting their own personal ability to encrypt. And it's very much in line with the principles of the internet itself. So I know that we all work very hard to get to where we want to get to. I feel very comfortable with where the Internet Society is on these issues. Anything else?
Okay, we'll take that one last question and then we better move on.
Thanks. Just a quick question about the report. What was the most surprising or interesting thing that you found in that report personally?
I think the most, for me, that 94% of the population actually they are within a network. It doesn't mean they are actually attached to that network, but that the networks are that far along and that we are moving with the speed we are moving to the next broadband phase of the internet connection, which is really 3G, but now 4G, and if you talk to the folks in the lab, 5G pretty soon. Those are speeds at which most people can exist. You know, that you have a very good connection with that. And it turns out, therefore, that the developing world is a major, major beneficiary of this, because those technologies are leaping. You have fiber here. I've not heard of a fiber build in the provinces that you have here in almost any place else in the world. So that means that this leapfrog is going to be the way to go. So that it's moving as fast as it is a good surprise. So with that, thank you very much. This has been great, and have a good week.